Start streaming, start recording. And then Sean, you're all plugged in to go?
I will be.
Okay, you plug in. And I'm gonna come here. Guys, don't let me forget, I got one public comment. Oh, my agenda. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, November 13th at 6 p.m. You're at the Village of Vernon Village Hall. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to call the Village Board and Plan Commission meeting to order, and I'll do the roll call. I am here for the record. We have Trustee Pekka.
Here.
Trustee Finch.
Here.
Trustee Newman.
Here.
Trustee and Commissioner Millies.
Here.
Commissioner Nowak.
Here.
Commissioner Rinaldi.
Here.
Commissioner Alex.
Here.
We'll note for the record that we do have a quorum in full compliance with the Village Board and Plan Commission. Let's see, our next agenda item is the reconvening of a public hearing. This is a public hearing that the Village Board and Plan Commission held jointly on October 9th, 2024. And at that time, the Village Board had made a motion to reconvene this public hearing to November 13th, 2024 at 6 p.m. There were some additional comments made on the accessory dwelling unit. And we've asked Sean to make those amendments. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean and correct the volume.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I'm buzzing over here. Thank you. So yeah, we've talked about this multiple times. The public hearing started last month. We're continuing today. There was a couple of things that were talked about last time, and we decided to go back, amend the language, and then bring it back one final time for review. A couple of things. One was removal for detached accessory dwelling units. There was a provision in the draft language that said it couldn't include a basement. That's been now stricken. We tuned up the language for compatibility for attached accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units. I worked with Commissioner Alex on that, so that's now in the draft language. And I talked to both Commissioner Nowak as well as Commissioner Alex on the issue with relation to accessory dwelling units counting toward the open space requirements in the zoning district. I kind of went back and forth on this. Dan, when I originally talked to you about it, I think we were leaning toward having them count toward the open space requirement. So if you have two dwelling units, you have to double the open space requirement for your lot. When I talked to Mike about that same issue, we looked at some examples and found out that, you know, like for one of the zoning districts that requires 2 acres of open space per dwelling unit, if all of a sudden you have to double that, now you're at 4 acres, and we're allowing, say, detached accessory dwelling units on 3 acre properties, that's going to double or make the lot size bigger as well, so it blows out 3 acre out of the water just by that. So I felt, based on that these are accessory dwelling units, that it's not required to have any additional open space. You just have to follow the requirements of zoning for the minimum lot size. And then obviously, as we talked about, the detached, you have to have 3 acres minimum no matter what. So you already have a pretty substantial lot as part of that. So that's the extent of the changes that we made since last time. In the packets, everything that's been changed is highlighted in yellow. So that's all I have.
And I just wanted to state for the record that, you know, Sean indicated he spoke to Commissioner Alex, Commissioner Nowak, but all these things were brought up because the attorney, you know, made an issue with that. We did bring those things up at the last meeting, so I just wanted to note for the record.
Thanks for that. Those are the reasons we brought it back in the first place. So I just wanted to get their input on those items because we didn't have a chance to talk about it at the last meeting, but we're bringing them to light here as part of the public hearing.
Sounds great. What I'd ask right now is before we go to the public again, is there any additional comments from the Plan Commission and the Village Board before we open up additional public comments. We'll go back and forth till everybody's done talking. But I just wanted Plan Commission and Village Board to address Sean on any of the issues he brought up that we talked about last time, or anything additional. Please indicate to Sean. There's nothing from... So what I'd like to do now, is there anybody in the public that wants to make any additional comments based upon the language that is set before you this evening? One thing I want to do before I don't forget, I did get one request. This is from Lisa Gillies. She lives at South 78, West 23980 Sherry Avenue. She wanted to state for the record, I am for the accessory dwelling, detached dwelling, and hope that it passes on the 15th. Just want to note that for the record, that's the only public comment that was emailed to the village. So there doesn't look like there's any comments, any additional comments from the Plan Commission. I know we've talked about this many, many times, but one last chance, Plan Commission, Village Board. Oh, Dan, Commissioner Nowak?
I didn't realize at the last meeting that, Sean, you were going to eliminate the owner-occupied part of that. I know we talked about being difficult maybe to enforce, but that's the same thing we've got right now under the mother-in-law units. I think if we eliminate that, we're opening this up to have rental units. Anybody can build a detached accessory dwelling unit and rent it out.
Yeah, I'm just going through the conditions here.
I think they should only be built, that was...
So 1E, which is not numbered correct, or lettered correctly, says a lot or parcel of land containing an ADU shall be occupied by the owner of the premises. The owner may live in either the ADU or the principal dwelling unit. A deed restriction to this effect shall be recorded with the county register of deeds. So that is still in there.
What's that?
That's still in there.
Yes, I remember it was either, I think it'd be in either unit.
They can live in either unit.
So it's in 1E?
1E, it's lettered incorrectly. That would really be D, but it comes out, yeah, A, B, C, and then it says E. So it's one.
Unless I don't have an updated one, I should.
It's the one with the yellow highlights and things.
Yeah, it's the one I was looking at in the packet.
So it's basically the top of page 2 of that document.
Okay.
In the E packet, it's page 4.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just looking at my one
Sorry.
document. But no, that's okay. Do you see it yet, Dan?
Yeah, I thought in your report you said you eliminated it though.
No, that was the old one. When I originally looked at this, we did eliminate it because the attorney was recommending to eliminate it.
Okay.
We dropped it back in there because it's really been untested.
Further discussion from the Plan Commission or Village Board? There is no, for the record, there is no other additional comments from the Village Board or Plan Commission. I'll turn to the public. Is there any additional comments from the public at this point? No additional comments. Hearing no additional comments from the public or the Village Board, I'm going to close the public hearing. And now I'm going to open a public hearing between the Village of Vernon Board and Plan Commission on November 13, 2024. Immediately after this public hearing on W249 South 8910 Center Drive to take comments on an application applied for by Tim Abrahamson to rezone his property from A5 agriculture 5-acre density to RRD5 rural residential density 5-acre. The tax key number is 207999. The property is in the Village of Vernon at W255 South 8355 Hilo Drive. Tim, you want to just take a seat up here, Tim? And what I'm going to do, just so the public knows, I'm going to have our Planning and Zoning Director, Sean Malarkey, do an overview of the petition. And then, Tim, if you think Sean's missed anything in his comments to the public and the board, we'll ask you to make comments. Then we'll open it up to the public for public comments, and we'll open it up to the Village Board and Plan Commission for comments. We'll go back and forth until everybody's done making their comments. So, Tim, if you don't mind, Sean, I'll have to send it over.
Do you want to flip me over?
Okay, hold on. I'm stuck in all these cords. Okay, you are. Takes like 5 seconds.
if we don't have it. I'll just start, and then
Okay.
we get it. So the property is on the west side of Highway Drive, just south of the interstate. It's an 18-plus acre property. It's currently zoned A5 mini farm. The petitioner would like to split off a 5-acre lot from the property. There's an existing house and a number of accessory buildings there now. A large portion of the property is currently being farmed as well. The current zoning A5 does allow 5-acre lots. However, it requires a minimum lot width of 300 feet, and the total property wouldn't be enough to get an average width on that 5-acre lot, and then the remainder to have an average width of 300 feet as well. So the petitioner's requesting to rezone the property from A5 to RRD5. Now, the comprehensive plan for this property and surrounding properties is 1 unit per 5 acres, so it doesn't really matter which zoning district. They both work for the comprehensive plan. Still is 1 unit per 5 acres. He's proposing a 5-acre lot. If you look at the zoning, at the end of my staff report, I included a zoning map. Essentially, the property to the north is already zoned RRD5. To the south, it's already RRD5. There's some across the street, so it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to rezone the property from A5 to RRD5. In the petitioner's application, there's a conceptual drawing. That's since been updated. Yesterday, a certified survey map was submitted that shows a slightly different configuration. It's generally very similar, 5-acre lot. So the one thing that I was confused about, and maybe we can clear this up, is that originally when we talked, I was assuming that the entire property would be rezoned from A5 to RRD5. It doesn't have to be that way. I saw the CSM that came in yesterday that showed the larger lot remaining as A5, the smaller lot being zoned as RRD5. The way the public hearing was noticed for the rezoning was for the whole property to be rezoned, but I did speak with the village attorney, and he basically said because we're reducing what was being asked for, essentially making it, less than was asked for, it's okay to proceed either way tonight, whether you want to rezone the whole property RRD5 or do just the 5-acre portion as RRD5. If we do the whole thing RRD5, it essentially lets you, it gives you another development right potentially for the larger property down the line. But what you're going to have to do is record a deed restriction on that portion of the property and the smaller property, basically saying, hey, the development rights are used up under the zoning district, there's only one left and it's on the big parcel, so that we can keep track of it. Or if you want to keep the larger parcel zone A5 and just zone the smaller parcel, you don't have to do any of that because it doesn't matter then. So
I think that's what I would prefer.
it's kind of up to you as to what you want to do.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to do that at this point. I really have no intention of developing the rest of it.
It's also very tough to develop unless you do it in conjunction with your neighbors and something was coordinated down the line. But you could always ask for a rezoning later as well. So that keeps things simpler if we just do the small lot, RD5. Everything that's shown is basically meets the requirements of the ordinance. I guess the one caveat is that there's a number of accessory buildings in the larger parcel. Those are legal non-conforming because there's more than 3 there. You're in terms of square footage, you're fine, but because there's more than 3 and we're making that lot smaller, we do allow waivers for accessory buildings exceeding 3. That's not part of this decision tonight, not part of the rezoning when the CSM comes forward next month, because we can't take action on the CSM tonight because we just got it yesterday. The petitioner would also be requesting a waiver for the number of accessory buildings on that 8+ acre parcel. So I guess that's all I got unless there's other questions.
Tim, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, that's all completely accurate. The surveyor was the one that suggested that I might want to leave that zoning. There's no benefit, so why would I change it? And
yeah.
the way that land lays, the way the road lays, it's going to require a neighboring property if that ever gets developed.
Okay.
The only other thing I'd add is, so in my conditions, essentially, so I have condition 1, which is the rezoning would not be in full force into effect until the deed restriction is recorded. That's no longer needed. And then condition 2 would essentially be changed to lot 1 of the proposed CSM shall be rezoned from the A5 mini district to the RR5 district instead of the full parcel is essentially what he's asking for. So that's it.
Okay. And Tim, you didn't want to add anything else to Sean's presentation?
No, that's
Okay.
accurate.
Okay, so what I'll do right now is ask the public, is there any, Tim, if you want to just take a seat back there.
Okay,
And then
thank
if
you.
there's anybody from the public that wants to come up and give comments, we just would ask that you state your name and full address and address the Village Board and Plan Commission. Is there anybody from the public that wants to give comments? And we'll come back to the public again if you don't want to talk now. But doesn't look like anybody from the public now. So what I do is ask the Plan Commission and Village Board if they, Tim, you want to come up? Just, sorry. If they have any questions from Tim or the planner in regards to the presentation. I know it's pretty simple. Commissioner Nowak?
Well, we don't have a copy of the division here. Apparently the 5-acre parcel would be to the north.
Yeah, you have a copy in the packet of the
All we have is
the sketch.
full lot there.
There should be a sketch in the packet, in the application. Did anybody see it, the
No.
conceptual
It's two
sketch?
pictures.
No, those are from my staff report. Is that, the actual application has,
Oh, I didn't put the application in.
in the report?
No, I don't think did you see the application? No.
No.
Okay, so if I can describe it, it's on the north, yes. It essentially,
I've got a copy of that survey if they want to look at it.
yeah, if you want to pass it around, that would be great. It's 5 acres, it's 248 feet wide, and it's 878 feet deep, so.
So Sean, if the larger parcel remains A5 mini farm, does the accessory building number that relates to that?
Yeah, so that's what the waiver would be needed when we look at the CSM.
Even if it's used for agriculture?
That doesn't matter in this case, yeah, because it's not in the, and we'll have more details on that next month in terms of what those buildings are used for, et cetera.
Sure.
Is there anybody from the audience that would like to see the certified survey map? I mean, we're not acting on it, but you can at least see the division.
So the rezone would apply to lot 1 of that proposed CSM.
We'd like to see it back here.
I can take
Oh, I should have probably sent this one around too. This is what the actual lot itself would be. First one is the entire property. Simple rectangle.
Wait till the picture goes around to the planning commission and village board.
What is the access easement for on there?
So that is going to provide access for the farm fields for the agriculture.
Okay.
The only other way they could really get there, my driveway's too tight. So the only other logical access point would be on the south lot line. But the grade between my field and that road is going to be a minimum of a 5-foot drop. It's not a good spot.
Okay.
The easement on the north side is exactly where the driveway for those fields has been forever. And it just makes sense to keep it there, plus the setbacks, so that easement, in my mind, wouldn't affect any setbacks. And it's at the top of the hill, so even as far as traffic's concerned with them getting in and out of their equipment, it would create a traffic hazard if I tried to put it on the south end. The people coming over the top of it won't be seeing them coming out.
And just, we haven't reviewed the CSM in any detail at all yet. So
I guess I'm just pointing out the logic.
no,
of the layout.
yeah, and that's all good information, but yeah, we haven't looked at it.
Tim, is this yours?
Yeah. Somebody want to see back there?
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. That's something different.
Well, this is the actual lot. I mean, all the same information's there, but this shows the lot.
Oh, it's the lot.
Later.
Okay. So the driveway would be on the north.
Yeah, the driveway's
Where
not
it is now.
changing. Yeah, nothing's changing. And I mean, I think that's a logical point because that's at the top of the hill right across from you guys.
Right, so if we
So-
want the lot here.
If there's any comments, say, Tim,
Yeah.
if you could sit, if
I'm
he has
sorry.
comments, he has to enter those into the record. He can't just,
So no change in the access point.
Yeah, good.
okay, so what I'll go back is to the public. Are there any comments or questions from the public besides what Tim showed already? There are none. Plan Commissioner, Village Board, any comments or questions, or I'll ask the public one last time, any comments or questions? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. So the next agenda item is the request from the Village of Vernon Plan Commission and Village Board to amend Chapter 300 of the Village of Vernon zoning code to allow for an accessory residential dwelling unit, a second unit on one lot as a conditional use in agriculture and residential district, subject to the public hearing on this agenda. At this point in time, I would turn the discussion and possible action to the Village Board, which would be making a recommendation to the Village Board. Is there a motion or discussion or something from the Village Board in regards to the submittal made by our Planning and Zoning Administrator?
You meant the Plan Commission first?
Yeah, fine, yeah, that's what, yeah. Would be a possible action from the Plan Commission, so that's what I would be looking for. I'd make a motion to recommend to the Village Board to approve the amendments to Chapter 300 of the Village of Vernon zoning code to allow for an accessory dwelling structure, dwelling unit, a second unit on one lot as a conditional use in agricultural or residential district. Is there a second to my motion? Based upon the comments that were submitted by the planner on October 18th, 2024.
Second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? And once again, this was a recommendation to the Village Board, but it was made and seconded. Discussion from the Plan Commission? Discussion, hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion.
Nay.
Oh, one nay. Commissioner Noack, thanks, Dan. To the Village Board, I'd make a motion to concur with the Village of Vernon Plan Commission's recommendation to the Village Board as stated by the Village President is subject to also legal review of the Village Attorney because this would become an ordinance. So that was the only thing that the Village Board, they concur with the motion except for Village Board would send it to the Attorney for legal review. That was my motion. Is there a second to my motion?
I'll second it.
Second by Trustee Finch. Discussion from the Village Board. Discussion, hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, guys. And like I said, I'll send this off to John before I leave. Does that sound good?
So for the petitioner's benefit, obviously you started the process on this, and this has to be, it's got to go legal review, it's got to be put in ordinance form, and it's got to be adopted. So it's a few weeks out yet before it probably becomes law, and at that point you can submit your zoning and building permit application following that.
All right. Next agenda item is the rezoning of Tim Abrahamson's property from A5 agricultural 5-acre density to RD5 rural residential 5-acre density on the tax key number 2079999 located at West 55 South 8355 Highland Drive. This would be a Plan Commission recommendation to the Village Board on rezoning that property. Is there a motion from the Plan Commission?
I have a question first.
Sure.
Sean, can we rezone it if it doesn't exist at this point?
You can, as long as the condition says that the rezone would be for that proposed CSM parcel, provided it doesn't go into effect until the CSM's recorded.
Okay.
So I think, is that your,
That would be
item number
condition
one,
two.
we're dropping the deed restriction part. The rest of item number one stays in, because I think that's what that language does. Of your staff report?
Well, essentially, I mean, I'd suggest modifying number 2, because it says that lot 1 of the proposed CSM shall be rezoned from a $5 D5, and then followed up that it won't go into full force and effect until the CSM is signed and recorded.
And is that in your conditions, Sean?
That's not, I'm saying that would be my suggested
Okay.
condition 2.
Okay,
One should be stricken, and then condition 2 should be rewritten.
okay. Is there a motion from the Plan Commission?
I'll make a motion that we, send this to the board with approval, with the conditions as
Stated by the
amended by
plan?
Sean.
Okay. I have that motion recorded. Is there a second to Commissioner Nowak's motion for approval, to recommend approval to the village board?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Rinaldi. Discussion from the Plan Commission? Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Village Board, is there a motion to concur with the Plan Commission's recommendation of approval for the rezoning of the Tim Abrahamson's properties with the conditions as stated?
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Second by Trustee Millies. Motion was made by Trustee Millies, second by Trustee Peckett. Discussion. Discussion, hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next agenda item is one of our favorite subjects. It's a possible amendment to the Land Division Control Ordinance regarding cul-de-sacs. Sean, I feel bad that we don't have our...
No, that's okay, and in this one I wasn't going to show anything on the overhead anyways. The village board wasn't part of the meeting. On October 21st, we had a special meeting because petitioner came to the last Plan Commission meeting. It didn't get put on the agenda. Essentially, we started to talk about development just southwest of Edward Golf Course, near Castle Road and Clover Court. The issue that we talked about on October 21st essentially had to do with cul-de-sac length. And we've talked about this as a village a number of times. The village's cul-de-sac length is pretty limited at 600 feet for a permanent cul-de-sac, with the potential to stretch that out to 1,200 feet with a waiver, but nothing beyond that. And so that's fairly limiting. This particular development property that we were talking about needed some extension, some amount of extension to be able to develop some lots. And so what we're talking about today does deal with that in a way, but this is kind of outside of that because this affects the ordinance as a whole. So whatever we decide to do or not to do, while it affects that development, it's important for the village as a whole. So when I talked to the village attorney about this after our meeting on the 21st, I suspected this to be the case, but he confirmed that a petitioner can't petition the land division ordinance to be amended. There's no process to do so like there is the zoning ordinance, and so any petition has to come from the Plan Commission and Board. And so if we're talking about a cul-de-sac length here, we figured that we should at least bring up a couple other issues as it relates to cul-de-sacs, so we can look at it comprehensively, and you can decide whether or not you want to make changes to any or all of them or some of them. So the first thing we wanted to talk about was temporary versus permanent cul-de-sacs. One thing the attorney recommended is that the way permanent cul-de-sacs and temporary cul-de-sacs works is there's no legal way to define them or defend them. And so we talk about temporary cul-de-sacs for subdivisions where it maybe hits a property line, and then when the property to the east or west or north develops, it might be extended further. And so you put a temporary bulb on it. That bulb is on private property. If it gets extended, you do away with some of the bulb and you extend it onto the property. But there's a number of issues that deal with that come up because of those. One, because they don't often get a proper bulb at the end as a temporary cul-de-sac. Sometimes it's a T-turnaround. And if it's never actually extended, you're left with this substandard cul-de-sac. Oftentimes it's on private property. It never gets rectified, never gets remedied. So the solution would be to do away with the terms permanent and temporary, just require all cul-de-sacs to be a certain size, certain radius, and essentially they're all permanent unless they're extended in the future. And so that's the attorney's recommendation on how to handle those. Maximum length, again, we talk...
Sean, excuse me, can we stay with that temporary for a minute here? I guess I don't agree with the attorney on that.
Okay.
I think we should establish a temporary cul-de-sac as something that goes up to the end of the property, fully dedicated. It should have a full dedication for the cul-de-sac and be developed that way with a
Full right of way, full dedication.
proper bulk size.
But you can do that with, if it's, whether it's called temporary or not. If there's room on the back end of that cul-de-sac,
Right.
if it touches the right of way, you can extend it. As long as
It should be intended to be extended.
right, so
Now, the developer of that property that can be developed should pay for the removal of that cul-de-sac bulb and regrade it and dedicate that property back to that homeowner. A permanent cul-de-sac should be one that has a lot on the end of it.
Can't go any further.
Can't go any further.
So the developer-
Cannot be extended.
right, but the developer wouldn't pay to extend it beyond his property line. So if the right of way,
Not beyond the property line, but the property that wants to extend that,
they would pay for the extension.
they would pay for
Right,
it.
that would be the case no matter what, whether it's temporary or permanent.
Right?
I guess the point I'm making is that if the right of way for the cul-de-sac touches an adjacent property and you can extend it beyond that right of way no matter
What
what.
I'm saying is that a permanent cul-de-sac should not touch the end of that property. There should be a lot on the end of it, so it cannot be extended.
And that can happen, that can happen for any development that proposes it that way.
Well, you're saying here that a permanent cul-de-sac, they can dedicate property up to the property line and not develop it into a road. You
No,
have that situation,
is
no?
that the further down you're looking at?
No, right under, well,
So maybe I can make it clear. If a developer comes in and wants to propose a cul-de-sac and he's got his lots fanned around it, it's obviously not going anywhere else except these 5 lots that it's serving.
that should be a permanent.
Well, it's permanent by the default, by the fact that it's landlocked and it's never gonna go anywhere. It's got
Right.
dedicated right of way and above, so whether you call it permanent or not, it's still permanent based on, there's nowhere to go.
Well,
But, just let me finish. And if the developer comes in and basically has a cul-de-sac and there's other lots around it and it touches the adjacent property and the right of way is dedicated and the bulb is there and it's the right radius, but it touches the next property, whether you call it temporary or not, it can be extended because of this property next to it.
That should be called a temporary cul-de-sac.
But why does it have to be called that?
If it abuts then the property next door.
But it can be extended whether you call it temporary or permanent or whatever you call it. If it abuts a property, that
A
right,
permanent one should have lots all the way around it and could not be extended.
I guess I'm not following. So if it's landlocked, it by default becomes permanent.
That should be the definition of a permanent cul-de-sac.
If it's not landlocked, and you still have the right of way dedicated, you still have the right radius of the bulb, the pavement bulb on there, but it happens to touch another property,
That shouldn't be allowed.
why not? What's
Because
the
then
reason?
it's not a permanent cul-de-sac.
Well, what's the reason if you're dedicating the right of way and the pavement? I'm not following the logic of.
I think Sean is just saying, we're not gonna call it permanent or temporary, it's
Right,
just
right.
called a cul-de-sac.
It's just a cul-de-sac, you dedicate the pavement, you dedicate the right of way, that's it, end of story. And if there's room to extend it and you can extend it, then by all means extend it. If you can't, because there's lots around it, then you can't.
Because I think in the same development, you can probably have some that are, what you're describing, Dan, as being, fully developed versus some that are, on the perimeter of that same development. You could have a subdivision where you have, development goes onto a cul-de-sac on this side and you have back lots that share a rear property line. That's kind of an internal cul-de-sac, for lack of a better word, versus the ones that are on the perimeter that and I think this was going to be my question, we have the ability as the Plan Commission to say, well, no, we see that there's potential development next door, so we need to make sure that we get access to that property. And I think that goes in the development process where we can kind of dictate, because the developer is going to say, why can't I get another lot onto this? I can sell a lot, who cares? I don't own the property next door. But we as the municipality can say, we understand that, but in order to do that, we want to do it in a logical way so that we can plan for future development.
The way, if we're gonna be requiring that it extends or goes to the lot line, that should be a temporary cul-de-sac.
Well, in effect, it would be if it's ever extended, but we wouldn't call it that. We would just make sure the pavement's there, the right-of-way is there, and it's a cul-de-sac. So if it never gets extended, it exists perfectly.
A good example is the Hine property where it went all the way up to the lot line. I didn't like that because there was a possibility of extending
Right.
that sewer to the next property.
And that one got pulled back, yeah.
So we put in a permanent cul-de-sac there instead of a temporary one.
But let's say we wanted it to go to that property to the northeast, because we just...
Then it should be called a temporary cul-de-sac and go all the way to that
What
lot
the
line.
attorney, but effectively, they're exactly the same, because you have the same pavement with radius, and you require a right-of-way dedication. So whatever you call it doesn't matter what you call it. So what the attorney is saying is that there's no legally defensible way, because of what we're saying, they can go to call one temporary, to call one permanent. And by requiring the right-of-way dedication up front, we're never going to have these issues again where these aren't extended, you have a tiny little bulb, you have pavement on private property, and never ever gets resolved. So,
But we should eliminate the temporary cul-de-sac where we have an easement on the private property to build that, right? Those are where we have problems.
yes, that's true. That's true. So let me just get through all these, and then we can double back. So length, right now it's 600 feet. Most communities have something around, not all communities, but most communities I'm familiar with have either 1,200 feet or 1,320, which is a quarter mile, as their typical cul-de-sac length, with the ability to do waivers. A lot of communities don't have a maximum length for waivers. It's just based on discretion and so on and so forth. So you might consider that, or you might consider like doubling it up to 2,400 feet or a half mile, which is 2,640 feet. If you do go the waiver process and you allow an additional length based on waivers, some things that you might consider is that, topography, environmental constraints, lack of potential additional road connectivity, other particular conditions, that the cul-de-sac length won't cause undue traffic impact due to any road intersection, due to the scale of development, so you're not funneling too much development to one intersection, and then the fire department would also take a look at it as well for fire safety. So those are things we would suggest for waiver considerations. Land divisions at the end of existing temporary cul-de-sacs. So we know we have a bunch of temporary cul-de-sacs that exist because the proper bulbs weren't laid out and the proper right-of-way wasn't laid out. Those are supposed to continue. We've had many instances where the neighboring property where it's supposed to extend doesn't want to do a development, essentially, or they want to just split one lot off. They want to just do one split and that's it, and they don't want to extend the road. We don't have anything in our ordinances that prevent that. As a matter of policy, we've never allowed it. We said, well, if you don't want to split it, that's fine. You can do one single-family lot. You don't have to extend the road. I'm sorry, one single-family home, no splits. You don't have to extend the road, but you're not going to get a land division unless you extend that road. We're suggesting that language be added to the land division ordinance so that it's clear that you can't do land divisions where that temporary cul-de-sac is supposed to be extended. The existing temporary cul-de-sac. And then finally, we don't want to allow a cul-de-sac to basically stop short of a neighboring property, and that the developer essentially just builds his cul-de-sac to service his lots, but then just dedicates it a right-of-way to the back of the property, so that who's going to pay for the road at that point? We want to make sure that the developer develops that cul-de-sac all the way to the property line, if that's the intent of where it's supposed to go. And so that should also be written into the land division ordinance. So this is our comprehensive look at cul-de-sacs. If we're going to change one thing, we might want to look at the rest, but you don't have to. We're just suggesting it. So that's the next step. Essentially, would be to direct staff to draft changes for any or all of these, and then we bring it back for a public hearing. That's it.
Further comments from the Plan Commissioner Board?
I like most of your ideas. I think we should limit it to 1,200 feet, like most of the other communities, without a waiver. Maximum length with the waiver, I don't believe we should go a half mile. I think we should eliminate that part. And it may be, the village may consider an open-ended length, following the parameters you give under the waiver considerations.
That's my suggestion too. I don't think we should necessarily put a limit on it, because it's gonna be case by case. You're gonna consider the waiver considerations as well, so that's my recommendation, but I threw those in there, in case you wanted to consider them.
In the land divisions at the end of an existing temporary cul-de-sac, I think that's a good idea to have that in there. But I think it should also state that the home should be located so as to not prohibit future expansion of that cul-de-sac or roadway.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
You can't put the home right where the road is supposed to go.
And so, when we were looking at this, when Sean and John and I were looking at this and looking at some of the development that exists in Vernon with extremely long cul-de-sacs, that's an issue because it's a temporary, and the concern is how do you make that, is it a legal non-conforming use because of the setbacks of the temporary cul-de-sac? So Dan's point is extremely well taken.
Yep.
Any other comments?
Silly question, but I'm good for those. Do we have a definition of cul-de-sac? Because I looked in the definitions and I don't know if I saw one. And the reason I bring it up is I know there was some discussion of where does the cul-de-sac start. If we're talking about length, we need to know, like, okay, cul-de-sac, I think when we were looking at the subject property, we all said, oh, well, the cul-de-sac is whatever court, Clover Court or whatever it was.
Great point.
But it's like, well, let's take it all the way back. So what was that discussion?
So we haven't discussed this, but that's a great point. I'm sure that if we don't have a definition for cul-de-sac, we should, and we should also define how it's measured.
Yeah, what's to say that this developer, okay, I get the 1,200 feet, it goes to the end of his property. Then the next property, yeah, I want to go on that too, another 1,200 feet.
Right.
It keeps.
And that's up to you whether or not to allow that. So you'd be looking at those waiver considerations and looking at surrounding properties, whether it's got any impact to connect or any possibility to connect to surrounding properties, whether there's too many houses on it, too much traffic, whether the fire department thinks it's a fire hazard because the cul-de-sac's too. We'd be looking at all those every time.
Before you know it, you got over a mile long cul-de-sac.
Right, and so we wouldn't necessarily want to allow those, but it's going to be case by case.
One question I have is, can you flesh out for me the no land divisions on the neighboring parcel? I'm just concerned if I'm a parcel owner, all of a sudden how the neighbor develops theirs, if they're going to subdivide it and, max out the number of properties that they can have, now that's going to limit me on mine just because now they have a road access that abuts my property? Am I hearing that right?
I don't know if I understand. Let me just tell you what this is supposed to mean. So if you have a cul-de-sac that's supposed to extend eventually to neighboring property because for development potential, and it ends, we don't want that property it's butting into to be divided unless that road gets extended, if that's what the plan is.
Yeah, and that's my concern because you're kind of dictating to this neighboring parcel owner, oh, your neighbor subdivided, now you're limiting the neighbor's rights just because they subdivided first. I don't know.
Well, that's part of the overall, I mean, you're the plan commission, I'm
Yeah.
the planner. We're supposed to be planning for future development, so that's unfortunately, we're looking out for the best of the community. So if it impacts one property, in a certain way, I mean, I get that, I feel for that, but we're supposed to be looking at the big picture, so.
And does that, I guess we would have the oversight. What if the layout of that parcel doesn't make sense to extend it? Maybe when it was
Then we
first
would
looked at.
have never allowed that cul-de-sac to hit that property if it was never going to be extended, right?
But like right now, we have some that we're like, well, why is that thing dead ending there? And the layout to maximize the number of lots on the neighboring parcel might be to have it end before that.
I agree. There's been some questionable planning decisions in the past, and there's a lot of cul-de-sacs that abut into wetlands essentially. Like it was supposed to extend to the wetland at some point, and it can't. So our job is to make sure that when these cul-de-sacs hit the neighboring property for future development, it makes sense, right? Makes sense for the layout at a location that makes sense for maximizing lots, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the idea.
Yeah, my other concern is if you have a really large parcel that's next to a parcel that's divided, all of a sudden, you own 200 acres that's abutting 200 acres. you want to not touch that neighboring land at all. You don't want to subdivide it, but you do want to carve out 2 5-acre parcels on that of the 200. All of a sudden you're hamstrung to say, yeah, in the future we might want to develop all of that
Right.
down there, but right now we don't.
That's a valid point, and maybe the way we can address that is essentially say that if it's going to essentially impact the extension of that future roadway, then it wouldn't be allowed. But if it was, let's say, off somewhere else in the property, let's say it touches another road, right? So here's the property, here's the temporary cul-de-sac, we want that to be extended in the future, but they just want to do one lot in the corner down here. We wouldn't necessarily want to prohibit that if, as long as it doesn't mess with the road coming through.
Yeah, and I guess in general, I'm kind of for having tools to be able to make, like you said, we're trying to dictate or kind of see what we want from a planning process, but I also don't want to hamstring property owners who would like to do that. So giving us the tools to be able to, like we have things like waivers and that,
Right.
To be able to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because like I said, if it's a 200 acre or 2,000 acre parcel and all of a sudden you're doing something on the far corner, people don't even know it's the same parcel. We have some parcels that are split by the interstate or, roads that all of a sudden, yes, technically this is the same parcel, it didn't get cleaned up when it should have gotten cleaned up, and now we're hamstrung to say, well, you can't divide it.
Yeah, I would say we'd limit it, we'd prohibit divisions that would impact the extension of that future roadway, essentially.
I like the idea of that.
Further discussion from the Plan Commissioner Board? Is there a recommendation from, Sean, do you want separate motions from the Commission and Board?
I don't know, I mean.
Should we just by consensus instruct staff to make the modifications stated by the Commission and bring it back next meeting, or?
Yeah, that would be fine by me, and the question is, do you want to see it first before it goes to public hearing, and then public hearing after?
Do you need a motion to that extent?
Or it can be by, if you guys all agree by consensus to have staff drafted, bring it back, and then to our December meeting where we can make a recommendation, go to public hearing? Is that,
Right.
does the Plan Commission and Board agree? I'm seeing everybody shake their heads except for Dylan and Gary. They're shaking their heads, yes.
And I would say a definition would be kind of wrapped up in that too,
Yep.
if that has to be.
Okay, Sean, so you.
Yeah, I have direction based on the items we talked about, brought up.
I guess I have one question for you, Sean.
Yeah.
As far as the measurement of that length, would that start from the center line of the road that it comes in off of? Or the edge of the right-of-way?
It's basically well, there's two things to consider. One is so if this is an intersection, it's the center point of the intersection is the way I've always measured it from.
Okay.
And then where it goes back to is essentially where the nearest point where there's an alternate route, essentially. So if there's only one way in and one way out, and let's say there's another cul-de-sac that doesn't really go anywhere, you can't use that for extra length. So it's got to be, you got to bring it back as far, you measure it back as far as to where there's another way in and out of the subdivision, essentially. So we can debate that. I know.
Yeah, thinking about other parts of our code, I know that the ideas of arterial and collector street are used. I don't know if this is a way of trying to use that as like a common thing that we use across the board, if that's a good thing, if we should change that language or verbiage. But I think that's what that kind of speaks to as far as something that's a collector street has multiple things. So once it reaches a collector street, and then the definition of collector street kind of falls into that, you have multiple places to go, it collects from others. I don't know.
I see where you're going, because that is the definition of a collector, obviously, but it doesn't, some subdivisions are kind of convoluted, and there's a bunch of different ways in and out, and so none of those may be collector streets, and so, but we'd still want to stop the length of a cul-de-sac as soon as there's another route to go out, so we might be hamstringing ourselves if we just make the definition or the distance go all the way back to a collector.
Sound good, Mike? Have you ever seen a good definition of a collector or arterial? Have you, Sean?
I mean, I've seen a lot of definitions. Essentially, they're pretty vague usually. Like
Are
a
they?
collector is vague. It's usually just collects from smaller subdivided streets. it's whatever you want it to mean, essentially.
So I have, Sean, you know exactly where we're coming from?
I think so, yeah, and again, we'll bring back language, we can tweak it.
That sounds good. With that, I would enter to our minutes are not complete at this point, so this is one of our funner parts of the evening. Is there a motion to adjourn from the planning commission?
Yes.
Okay, now you guys are all talking. I have a motion made by Commissioner Alex and a second by Commissioner Rinaldi to adjourn. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And is there a motion from the village board to adjourn? By trustee Finch, second by trustee Pecca. Discussion from the village board. Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned, gentlemen. Thank you.
Next Monday at 5.
Next Monday, yeah, next Monday at 5. So, yeah, got a Zoom.
Okay.
Is that okay?
And then we'll do the,